The cabin lights glowed softly over the polished seats of business class as Natalie Burns strode confidently down the aisle, her heels clicking with practiced precision. She had worked for the airline for nearly 12 years, and in her mind, she had seen it all. Rude passengers, entitled businessmen, last-minute tantrums. Natalie prided herself on keeping everything in line. She was known among the crew for her control, her ability to spot trouble before it even unfolded. So when her eyes landed on a woman seated alone in 3B, wearing tired navy blue scrubs, her long dark hair hastily tied back, and her posture slumped in quiet exhaustion, Natalie immediately sensed something was off. The woman, Dr. Rhea Patel, looked out of place amidst the sharp suits and expensive handbags. Her presence was subtle, unobtrusive, and entirely undeserving of the suspicion it received. But Natalie saw the worn uniform, the deep lines of fatigue under her eyes, and let her assumption take the lead. Without even a greeting, she approached the woman with a slight frown. "Excuse me, miss," Natalie said, her tone clipped and professional. "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" Rhea blinked, confused, startled out of the daze she had slipped into after boarding. Her voice was hoarse from a 36-hour hospital shift, but she still managed to speak clearly. "Yes, 3B." She reached into her jacket pocket and handed over the boarding pass with a quiet politeness that betrayed no irritation. Natalie barely glanced at it before shaking her head, already convinced it was a mistake. "This is business class," she repeated, her voice now louder, firmer. "These seats are reserved for our premium passengers." Rhea sat upright, her brows gently furrowed. "I am a premium passenger," she said softly. "I booked this seat." Her words weren't defensive, just matter of fact. But Natalie was already shaking her head, folding her arms with a hint of condescension in her posture. Sometimes upgrades get issued by accident, or the reservation system gets confused. "It happens," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But this section is for frequent flyers, professionals, people who travel business class regularly." The implication hung in the air like smoke. "You don't belong here." Around them, passengers were starting to glance up from their tablets and newspapers, some pretending not to listen, others watching the exchange with thinly veiled curiosity. Rhea could feel their stares like pinpricks. She opened her mouth to protest, to suggest they check the system to confirm her booking, but Natalie had already stepped aside, gesturing down the aisle. "If you'll come with me, we'll find you a seat in economy," she said briskly. Her tone offered no room for discussion. Rhea hesitated, her fingers tightening around her bag. Her legs felt heavy, and her chest tightened with something deeper than just exhaustion: disbelief. She had spent the last 3 days in a trauma ward, treating emergencies with little rest, holding the hands of strangers, fighting for lives that didn't always make it. All she had wanted was to sit down, close her eyes, and breathe. But now she was being treated like a fraud, like someone who had slipped into the wrong section by mistake, like a problem. She stood slowly, refusing to let the emotions show on her face. As she gathered her things, the voices in the cabin quieted to a hush. No one said a word in her defense. No one asked Natalie to double-check. The seatbelt signs were still on, but the real authority on this flight wasn't the pilot. It was Natalie Burns. And Natalie had decided that Dr. Rhea Patel didn't belong. With her head held high, Rhea followed Natalie down the aisle, each step feeling like a betrayal of herself. Her chest burned with quiet humiliation. She had the receipt. She had the booking confirmation. But it didn't matter, because none of it had been enough to earn her the benefit of the doubt. Natalie stopped near the back of the plane, pointing to an empty economy seat wedged between two strangers. "You can sit here," she said, as if she were doing Rhea a favor. Rhea didn't respond. She lowered herself into the cramped seat, placed her bag under the seat in front of her, and stared out the window. Her hands trembled slightly, the adrenaline from the confrontation now fading into helplessness. She pulled out her phone and typed a short message, her fingers slower than usual. "Rhea, they moved me, said I didn't belong in business class." A moment later, her phone buzzed with a reply. "Aiden, what do you mean? Who moved you?" Her reply was simple. "Rhea, the flight attendant." She didn't believe I had the right seat. There was a long pause, then another buzz. "Aiden, what's the flight number?" Rhea sent it without question. Then came the final message. Aiden, stay where you are. She locked her phone and sat still, trying to quiet the storm inside her. Because if there was one thing she knew about her brother, Aiden Patel, it was this. When he said, stay where you are, he wasn't just being protective. He was preparing for something. And Natalie Burns, who thought she was keeping order, had just pushed the wrong person too far. Dr. Patel sat motionless in her cramped economy seat, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her breathing shallow but steady. On the surface, she looked calm, peaceful even. Her dark eyes fixed on the window where streaks of sunset lit the clouds like fire. But inside, she was fighting to keep her composure from cracking. The sharp humiliation from moments earlier still echoed in her mind like an unanswered alarm. She had done nothing wrong. She had boarded the plane with a confirmed business class ticket, quietly taken her seat in 3B, and waited for the flight to begin. She hadn't demanded anything, hadn't spoken out of turn, hadn't raised her voice. But none of that had mattered. Natalie Burns, the senior flight attendant, had taken one look at her scrubs and weary expression and decided she didn't belong. And just like that, without any questions asked or any facts checked, Rhea had been escorted down the aisle and dropped into a lesser seat like she was luggage misplaced by mistake. The pain wasn't just in her legs, now cramped from lack of room. It wasn't even in her pride. It was in the memory, the knowledge that no matter what she had accomplished, no matter how many lives she had saved this week alone, it still wasn't enough for someone like Natalie Burns to see her as worthy. Rhea pulled out her phone, her hands trembling only slightly. She hadn't cried. She hadn't shouted. She wouldn't. Not here. Not for them. Instead, she opened her messages and typed out the only words that captured the weight of what had just happened. Rhea, they moved me, said I didn't belong in business class. The moment she hit send, the screen lit up. Aiden, what do you mean? Who moved you? Rhea's jaw tensed as she slowly typed back. Rhea, the flight attendant. She looked at me and just decided. Said it must have been a mistake. There was silence. A pause. And then came the message that would change everything. Aiden, what's the flight number? Her fingers hesitated for only a moment before sending it. She stared at her screen, her heart beating a little faster now. She didn't need to say anything more, because she knew exactly what her brother's silence meant. She knew what was coming. Aiden, stay where you are. She read the words once, then again. A small, almost imperceptible exhale escaped her lips. Her phone screen dimmed and she slipped it back into her coat pocket. Her eyes returned to the window, the fire fading into a deep purple sky. She didn't need to plot revenge. She didn't need to demand respect, because her silence had already spoken volumes. She didn't need to shout to be heard. She only needed to tell the truth. And now someone with the power to make things right was listening. Back in business class, Natalie continued her routine as though nothing had happened. She poured champagne for a well-dressed banker in 2A and chatted with a pair of tech executives discussing mergers. Her voice was light, her movements brisk, her smile automatic. There was no guilt in her eyes, no recognition that the woman she had just dismissed might be anyone of significance. To Natalie, the incident was handled. Over. A small correction in her otherwise flawless shift. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't even begin to imagine, was that she hadn't just moved an exhausted woman in scrubs. She had humiliated Dr. Rhea Patel, a renowned trauma surgeon and partner in the airline's medical partnership division. And even more importantly, she had disrespected the sister of Aiden Patel, the majority shareholder of the very airline she worked for. And now, for the first time in her career, Natalie Burns had no idea who she was dealing with. Rhea didn't smile at that thought. She didn't gloat. She wasn't someone who found satisfaction in revenge. But deep in her chest, beneath the exhaustion and restraint, something flickered. Not anger, not pride, resolve. This wasn't about being treated like royalty or having status recognized. It was about being treated like a human being. And Natalie had failed that most basic of expectations. Rhea wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was standing for the quiet ones, the hardworking ones, the people who didn't wear wealth or privilege like armor, but still deserve respect. And as she sat quietly, still as a stone in seat 22F, she knew one thing. This story wasn't over, not by a long shot. So if you are still here, listening, watching this unfold, stay with us. Because the woman who was dismissed as insignificant, she's about to become the reason everything changes. If you've ever been judged too quickly, if you've ever been looked at like you didn't belong, if someone ever tried to shrink you down without knowing your worth, then you already know how Dr. Riya Patel feels. You know that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes strength is the silence that comes right before the storm. Keep watching, because the storm is coming. Natalie Burns stood at the front of the aircraft, smoothing her uniform and reviewing the pre-flight checklist on her tablet. Unaware that her carefully curated world of control was seconds from unraveling. She had barely spared another thought for the woman in scrubs she'd escorted to economy class earlier. Dr. Riya Patel, or whatever her name was. To Natalie, it had been a minor issue, a simple course correction. That woman clearly didn't belong in business class, not in wrinkled scrubs, not looking like she'd dragged herself in from a hospital hallway. Natalie had seen people try to sneak upgrades before. This was just another case, or so she thought. But down in economy, Riya sat silently, her legs cramped, her head throbbing from lack of sleep and the weight of what had just happened. Her shift in the ER had ended only 3 hours before boarding, and she had rushed to the airport without even changing clothes, barely managing to catch the flight. But she hadn't come empty-handed. In her carry-on bag, tucked in beside a bag of trail mix and a paperback novel, was the letter she'd written to the family of a patient who hadn't made it through the night. His name had been Julio Alvarez, a 14-year-old boy who had been caught in crossfire on his way home from school. Riya had tried to save him, had fought for nearly an hour to bring him back. She had delivered the news to his mother herself, now with blood still beneath her nails and sleep clawing at her eyes. She had wanted just a few hours of quiet, of dignity, but Natalie hadn't given her even that. The intercom crackled suddenly, sharp and unexpected. "Miss Burns, please report to the cockpit immediately." Natalie's brow furrowed. The captain's voice was calm, but the tone held a weight she didn't recognize. She shared a confused glance with her junior crew member, then handed off the tablet and made her way toward the locked cockpit door. As she stepped inside, the chill of the air conditioning struck her skin, but it was nothing compared to the cold that would soon take root in her chest. Captain Monroe stood beside the co-pilot, arms folded, face unreadable. But it wasn't the captain who had summoned her. A small screen beside the control panel was active, on a video call. And on the screen sat a sharply dressed man in a navy suit, his features carved from ice, his eyes dark and unblinking. "Natalie Burns," he said, not asking, just confirming. She nodded slowly. "Yes, that's me." "My name is Aiden Patel," he continued, each syllable slicing through the air with precision. "I'm the majority shareholder of this airline." Natalie's heart stopped. The name hit her like a blow. Patel. Her mind raced backward, rewinding to the passenger in scrubs. Her stomach twisted. "I received a message from my sister," Aiden continued, his voice steady. "Dr. Riya Patel. She tells me she was removed from her assigned business class seat by you, despite presenting a valid boarding pass." Natalie's lips parted. She struggled to speak. She didn't look like—" "You didn't verify the manifest," Aiden said, cutting her off. "You didn't check the reservation system. You didn't confirm her credentials. You looked at her and made a decision." Natalie swallowed hard. "Sir, I was following protocol." "No," he said, his tone darkening. "You were following a bias." The silence that followed was suffocating. Natalie could feel her breath catch in her throat. She had been so sure of herself, so sure. And now, standing under the weight of this man's words, she felt smaller than she ever had before. Patel is not only a licensed trauma surgeon," Aiden said, "but a key partner in our airline's emergency medical consulting team. She has flown hundreds of hours with us, paid for every single one. And today, after working a 36-hour shift in a city hospital, after trying to save the life of a child, she boarded your flight seeking a few hours of peace, and you strip out her of that." Natalie blinked rapidly, her vision blurring at the corners. The cockpit seemed to narrow around her, the walls closing in. "This is more than a mistake," Aiden said. "This is a disgrace, and I assure you it will not be overlooked." Captain Monroe cleared his throat gently. "Mr. Patel has requested that Dr. Patel be immediately returned to her rightful seat." Natalie, you will personally escort her back to business class and issue a public apology. Aiden's eyes didn't leave hers. You will correct your error, and then upon landing, you will report directly to the Executive Disciplinary Board. They are waiting for your statement. If your answers fail to meet expectations, you will be relieved of your duties permanently. The call ended. Natalie stood frozen, her mouth dry, her breath shallow. She had spent years enforcing airline policy, commanding order in the sky. But now the very power she wielded so freely had collapsed beneath her. She wasn't just being reprimanded, she was being dismantled. And far behind her, in seat 22F, Rhea Patel sat without complaint, without tears, holding the letter she had written to Julio Alvarez's family. She hadn't asked for vengeance. She hadn't demanded respect. She had simply told the truth, and it had done what her voice alone could not. Now, if you've ever been overlooked, if someone ever made you feel small for just being who you are, keep listening. Because what happens next isn't just about justice. It's about a reckoning. And Natalie Burns is about to learn that the cost of a snap judgment at 30,000 feet is far greater than she ever imagined. Lisa Dawson stood frozen in the galley, her fingers tightening around the silver edge of the service counter as if it might somehow hold her upright. Her uniform, which once gave her a sense of pride and power, now felt like a costume stretched too tight against her chest, suffocating in its symbolism. For years, she had been the one who gave instructions, who corrected mistakes, who kept order. But now, with every breath, it was becoming clearer. She had been the one who needed correcting. And the worst part? Everyone was about to watch her learn that lesson in real time. Miss Dawson, the captain's voice buzzed from the overhead intercom again, sharp and undeniable. Please proceed to economy and escort Dr. Rhea Patel back to her assigned seat in business class. Immediately. The cabin, which had once been filled with hushed conversations and clinking glasses, grew unnaturally quiet. It wasn't just a standard announcement. This was something different. Passengers sensed it. They sat up straighter, their eyes flickering from their magazines and tablets, drawn toward the anticipation of something they couldn't name but could definitely feel: justice. Lisa's shoes tapped softly against the aisle carpet as she began the long walk to the back of the plane. Her head stayed high, but not out of pride. It was the kind of forced posture people used when they were trying to keep from falling apart. As she neared the economy section, every step felt like a punishment. Whispers stirred in her wake, subtle but sharp, little glances exchanged between passengers who had seen the incident unfold earlier. Some had watched as she dismissed the tired woman in scrubs without a second thought. Others had said nothing but had made up their minds the moment they saw Maya Patel quietly pick up her bag and walk away. Now those same passengers were watching her return, and they knew something had changed. Lisa reached row 22 and saw her, Dr. Rhea Patel, sitting quietly by the window. She hadn't moved. She hadn't made a scene. She hadn't even looked up when the captain said her name over the intercom. She didn't need to. Her silence had said more than any outburst ever could. Lisa paused beside the row, swallowing hard before speaking. Dr. Patel, her voice, usually crisp and commanding, came out smaller than she intended. Maya turned her head, meeting her gaze with a calm, unreadable expression. Lisa forced herself to continue. I've been instructed to return you to your original seat, in business class. The moment hung thick in the air. Lisa waited, expecting Maya to rise, but the doctor didn't move, not yet. Instead, she tilted her head slightly. Instructed? She asked softly. The word echoed between them. Lisa's throat tightened. Yes, she replied. I'm here to escort you. Maya studied her for a moment, then slowly reached down, picked up her bag, and stood with quiet grace. There was no trace of smugness in her eyes, no gloating, just poise, the kind that didn't need approval. And yet, as she stepped into the aisle and walked past Lisa, there was a collective shift among the passengers. Some raised their eyebrows. Some leaned slightly to watch. A few nodded subtly in acknowledgement, as if witnessing something that felt like balance being restored. Lisa walked ahead of Maya, her steps slower now, deliberate. She had never felt so exposed. When they reached business class, it felt like walking into a different world. Plush seats, wider aisles, passengers sipping wine, once indifferent, now alert. They all saw it, They all knew. Lisa turned to face the cabin. Her voice trembled as she forced the words out. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her eyes flicking from one passenger to another, "there has been a correction. Dr. Ria Patel was previously removed from this cabin due to an error in judgment. My judgment." The silence was complete now. Even the air seemed to still. Lisa's hands trembled, but she didn't stop. "I made an assumption. I did not verify the manifest. I did not check her reservation. I simply saw her and assumed she didn't belong here." Her voice cracked slightly, and she hated how vulnerable she sounded. But maybe that was the point, and for that, I am truly sorry. Maya stood at the front of the aisle, composed as ever. She didn't need the apology. She had already won. But the passengers did, and they sat with rapt attention, some nodding in approval, some just watching, their expressions unreadable. Maya stepped past Lisa and into seat 3B, the seat she had paid for, the seat that had been rightfully hers all along. As she sat down and buckled her seatbelt, she didn't look up. She didn't acknowledge Lisa again. She didn't have to. The silence said it all. Lisa turned, walking back toward the galley, but her steps weren't quite as steady now. She felt like the cabin was collapsing inward, like the air itself had turned against her. She had been stripped of the one thing she had always relied on, her authority. And now all she had left was shame. Behind her, Maya sipped her tea calmly, and for the first time in hours, she finally looked at peace. If you were still listening, still watching, this is the moment that matters. Because Dr. Ria Patel didn't fight for attention. She didn't beg for fairness. She simply waited for the truth to do what truth always does, rise. She stood for everyone who's ever been judged too quickly, dismissed too easily, told they didn't belong. And if you believe her strength should be honored, if her quiet grace moved you even just a little, leave a comment below to let her know. Like this video to show that people like Ria matter. And subscribe because we need more stories that remind the world what real strength looks like. Not loud, not aggressive, but silent, steady, and impossible to ignore. Lisa Dawson stood in the galley, the soft whir of the aircraft a distant hum compared to the roar inside her chest. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for a napkin, pretending to fold it neatly, but her fingers betrayed her. They shook, unsteady, fumbling with the edges like a child trying to stay composed. The whispers were faint, but she could hear them. Not their exact words, not clearly, but enough to know. The murmur of passengers, the occasional sideways glance, the not-so-subtle smirk from a businessman near the front who had definitely seen her walk Dr. Patel back to business class. It was everywhere. The cabin, which she had once ruled with quiet confidence, now felt foreign to her. She had always walked these aisles like they belonged to her. Not with arrogance, she had told herself, but with control. She was the authority, the decision-maker, the one who kept order. But now she felt like a ghost drifting through a space she no longer had permission to occupy. Her name had been whispered, not with respect, but with curiosity, judgment, pity. She could feel it hanging in the air like a foing. Every step she took weighted by the invisible chain of what she had done. Every time she turned her head slightly, she caught a passenger quickly looking away. Every time she reached for a glass, she swore someone was watching, measuring her. There was no escaping it. And worst of all, she wasn't even angry. She wasn't bitter or resentful. She was hollow. The confidence that she had worn like a second skin had been stripped away in a single flight. No arguments, no raised voices, just one decision, one mistake, unraveling everything she'd built for 10 years. She leaned against the cold metal of the service counter and tried to breathe through the pressure building in her chest. But her breaths were shallow, like her lungs no longer knew how to take in air. Images from the day flashed through her mind, the moment she'd seen Dr. Patel in scrubs, the certainty in her voice when she told her to move, the silence that followed when Maya hadn't argued. That was the worst part. Maya had said nothing. She hadn't fought back. She hadn't demanded respect. She hadn't yelled or cried or created a scene. She had simply moved, quietly, obediently. And it was in that silence that Lisa had made her gravest error, not realizing that the woman she had dismissed was someone with power, with dignity, with every right to be where she was. Lisa blinked hard as a tight burn formed behind her eyes. No, she couldn't cry. Not here, not now. But the emotions swelled anyway. Guilt, shame, fear. Not just fear of what would happen when the plane landed, when she would be marched off by security and forced to answer to Aiden Patel himself, but fear of something deeper. Fear that maybe she wasn't the person she thought she was. That maybe for all these years she hadn't been firm and professional. She had been cold, dismissive. Maybe she had let the small power she wielded get to her head. She thought back to other flights, other passengers. Had she been this quick to judge before? Had she overlooked someone else? Someone who didn't fight back? Someone who simply swallowed the humiliation and moved on? The thought made her stomach twist. Her eyes flickered to business class. Maya sat quietly, flipping through a magazine as if nothing had happened. Her tea rested on the tray in front of her, untouched. Lisa watched her for a moment, trying to find some sign of gloating, some smugness in her posture. But there was none. That made it worse. Maya wasn't celebrating this moment. She wasn't weaponizing her power. She had moved back to her seat and continued her flight as if Lisa didn't exist at all. Lisa wasn't worth her anger. She had become invisible, a non-factor. And in that invisibility, Lisa felt smaller than she ever had in her life. The sound of a child's laughter from economy floated down the aisle, light and out of place in the heavy silence she carried. Lisa turned away quickly, wiping her hands on a towel she didn't need. Her heart felt too big for her chest. She was trying to hold it all together, but inside she was crumbling. What was she supposed to do? Go back to work? Smile? Offer champagne with shaking hands while everyone watched her pretend like nothing happened? She caught a reflection in the mirrored edge of the cabinet. Her makeup was still intact, her uniform neat, her posture poised. But none of it mattered anymore. She looked like a flight attendant, but she didn't feel like one. Not anymore. She didn't know who she was in this moment. Just that she did not want to be seen, not like this. And yet, she was seen. For the first time in her career, people weren't looking through her. They were looking at her. And they weren't seeing the polished professional with everything under control. They were seeing the flaws, the cracks, the regret, the human beneath the uniform. Maybe that was what hurt the most. Because deep down, Lisa knew this wasn't just about a seat. This wasn't about Dr. Patel's scrubs or her quiet demeanor. This was about Lisa's choices, her assumptions, her failure to see people as more than who they appeared to be. If you're still listening, if you've made it this far, then maybe there's a reason. Maybe part of you sees something in Lisa too. Maybe you've made a mistake before. Maybe you've judged too quickly or said something you couldn't take back. Maybe you've been on the other side of power, misused it, misunderstood it. If so, comment below. Not to justify her actions, not to erase them, but to remind her that growth is still possible, that even those who fall hardest can still rise if they're willing to face who they've become. Lisa is facing it now. She's lost her footing, her authority, maybe even her career, but what she hasn't lost, what she can't lose, is the chance to be better than she was. Leave her a comment if you believe she can change, if you believe in accountability and redemption, because sometimes the most important part of the journey begins with a fall. Lisa Dawson stood at the front of the business class cabin, pretending to busy herself with arranging service trays. But the truth was she couldn't focus. Her hands trembled, her throat was dry, and every sound felt like it echoed louder than it should. The cabin was unusually quiet. The kind of quiet that settles over a place when everyone knows something has happened, when they're all waiting to see what will happen next. She kept glancing over at seat 3B. Jeremiah Patel sat there now, exactly where she was supposed to be from the beginning. She looked composed, calm, her tea untouched on the tray. She wasn't speaking, wasn't reacting, wasn't seeking revenge. But Lisa could feel her presence like a pressure in the air. Heavy, unspoken. Lisa hated that. She hated that she couldn't shake the image of Maya quietly picking up her bag hours ago and walking to the back of the plane without protest. That moment had replayed in her mind like a movie on loop ever since. She had dismissed her, judged her, and now she was the one spiraling. When Maya finally stood and walked toward the front of the cabin, Lisa felt it before she saw it. The passengers didn't move. They simply followed her with their eyes. She was still in scrubs, creased and worn after days of hospital shifts, and yet she walked with the kind of grace that made heads turn. Lisa stiffened when she realized Maya wasn't heading to the restroom. She was coming toward her. Her stomach turned. Her heart pounded so loud she wondered if others could hear it. Lisa straightened her posture instinctively, like a child preparing to be scolded. But Maya didn't speak right away. She stopped just a few feet from her and looked at her. Just looked. It wasn't an angry look. It wasn't gloating or smug. It was quiet, direct, honest. And somehow that made it hurt more. I assume, Maya said, her voice soft but piercing, that you've had time to think. Lisa nodded once slowly. Her throat was tight. Yes, I have. Maya tilted her head. So tell me, what exactly went through your mind when you saw me in that seat? The question wasn't laced with venom. There was no sarcasm, no trap, but it felt like a knife anyway. Lisa hesitated, blinking. Around them, business class had gone still. Passengers had stopped pretending to read. A few had frozen mid-sip of their wine. Everyone was listening, even if they pretended not to. I thought there was a mistake, Lisa said, her voice trembling, shame threading through every syllable. I didn't think you were supposed to be in that seat. Why? It was one word, one devastating word. Lisa swallowed. She didn't want to say it. But Maya waited, and somehow her silence demanded more than a raised voice ever could. Lisa dropped her gaze. Because of how you looked, she whispered. Because you didn't look like a typical business class passenger. Maya didn't move. And what does that look like? Lisa felt her eyes burn. She didn't answer, couldn't answer, because she already knew how damning the truth sounded. A woman in scrubs, no designer purse, no crisp suit, no over-the-top confidence. Just tired eyes and a quiet presence. And that had been enough for Lisa to decide she didn't belong. I didn't check the system, Lisa confessed, her voice breaking. I didn't ask questions. I just assumed. Maya nodded slowly, the hint of something unreadable flickering in her expression. That assumption cost you, she said. But more than that, it told me exactly what you think someone like me looks like, and what someone like me doesn't. Lisa's breath caught. The weight of the words hit her full force. This wasn't about a seat. This was about something deeper, something far more painful. Maya wasn't demanding an apology. She had already received that. She wasn't seeking validation or attention. She was giving Lisa a chance to face what she had refused to admit for years, that she saw people through a filter she had never questioned, one that had quietly whispered who deserved respect and who didn't. You looked at me, Maya continued, still calm, and you didn't see a doctor who'd just finished 3 double shifts. You didn't see someone who had spent the last 72 hours helping people fight for their lives. You didn't see a paying passenger who had earned her place here. You just saw someone who didn't look the part. And that was enough for you. Lisa couldn't breathe. Her voice trembled as she whispered, I'm sorry. Maya's expression softened slightly, but she didn't offer forgiveness. She didn't dismiss the pain. You don't need to apologize to me, she said. You need to ask yourself how many times you've done this before. How many people didn't have a brother like mine, or a title behind their name, or a chance for justice? How many just accepted your judgment and sat in silence because they thought they had no other choice? Lisa looked up, eyes stinging. She had no answer. Just a chasm opening beneath her, swallowing everything she thought she was. Maya stepped back, her voice quieter now. People like me, we learn early to stay quiet, to move when we're told, to avoid conflict. But that doesn't mean we don't notice. That doesn't mean we forget. With that, she turned and walked away back to her seat. And as she did, Lisa felt her legs weaken. Not because of the confrontation, but because Maya hadn't yelled, hadn't demanded consequences. She had just spoken the truth. And that somehow hurt more. If you're still here listening, I want to ask you, what would you have done? Would you have spoken up? Would you have looked at Maya and seen her for who she was? Or would you have done what Lisa did, judged before asking a single question? Leave a comment below, not just to support Maya, but to reflect on the kind of person you want to be. Because sometimes the people who say the least teach us the most. The galley was too quiet. The soft clink of a spoon in a glass, the low murmur of a conversation in business class, the distant rattle of turbulence beneath the cabin floor, all of it faded into background noise for Lisa Dawson as she stood frozen, hands gripping the metal edge of the counter. She had wiped the same glass twice now, not because it needed it, but because she needed something to do, something to keep her hands moving, anything to distract from the ache in her chest. She could feel her confidence slipping, unraveling thread by thread like an old sweater, finally giving out after years of wear. And then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw her, Hannah, the junior flight attendant, standing in the galley's entrance, arms folded, a look on her face that was hard to name. Not quite anger, not pity either. Something deeper, something quieter. And Lisa knew before a word was spoken that this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. "You all right?" Hannah asked, her voice light, but her eyes too sharp to match it. Lisa gave a hollow nod, still not looking at her. "I'm fine." Hannah stepped closer, her shoes soft on the floor. "You don't look fine." Lisa sighed, the exhaustion catching up to her all at once. "I'm handling it." "Are you?" Hannah said, her voice still even, but firmer now. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've just been hit by a train and haven't figured out how to get up yet." Lisa bristled. "I don't need a lecture." "I'm not giving one," Hannah replied calmly. "I just think maybe it's time someone said what everyone else is thinking." Lisa looked up, eyes narrowing. "Which is?" "That this isn't the first time you've done something like this," Hannah said, without flinching. "It's just the first time it backfired this badly." The words hit like a slap. Lisa opened her mouth to respond, to deny, to deflect, to explain, but nothing came out. Because deep down she knew. Hannah was right. Hannah didn't stop. She took another step closer. "I've worked with you for 2 years. You trained me. You told me how to keep control, how to make quick decisions, how to read people, and I believed you. Because you always seemed so sure of yourself. But today I saw something different. I saw what happens when someone doesn't fight back. When someone lets your assumptions speak louder than their voice ever could." Lisa clenched her jaw, forcing herself to stay upright. "I thought I was doing my job." "No," Hannah said, her voice firm now. "You were doing what you've always done. You judged someone the second you saw them. You looked at her scrubs, her tired eyes, and you decided she didn't belong. You didn't ask, you didn't check, you didn't even think." Her tone softened then. "Because you never have to think, Lisa. You're used to being right." Lisa's throat tightened. She hated how true it sounded. Hated that someone younger, someone newer, someone who used to look up to her, was now holding up a mirror she couldn't avoid. "Do you remember the young mom on that Denver flight?" Hannah asked suddenly, her voice quieter. "The one with the crying baby? She asked for a seat closer to the window so she wouldn't disturb anyone. You said no. Not because there weren't seats, but because you said she needed to learn how to manage herself in public." Lisa's stomach sank. "That was different." "Was it?" Hannah asked. "Or was it the same thing with a different face?" Lisa shook her head, but it felt weak, empty. "I've done this job for 10 years. And maybe you've been doing it wrong for 10 years, Hannah said gently, but not cruelly. "You've gotten good at controlling the cabin, keeping things running. But somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing people. You started seeing problems, categories, disruptions." Lisa's breath came short. She couldn't argue anymore. Because as Hannah spoke, her mind flashed with memories she hadn't thought about in years. Passengers whose names she'd never asked, whose faces she barely remembered, but who had walked away quieter than when they arrived. Not because she'd helped them, but because she'd dismissed them, shushed them, put them in their place. "And the worst part," Hannah said, her voice trembling now, "is that I was starting to be like you." Lisa looked up, startled. "I watched you. I admired you. I thought, that's who I want to be, someone who always knows what to do. But now," Hannah shook her head, "now I don't want to be anything like that." The words stung more than any punishment that could be waiting for her on the ground, because Maya had held her accountable as a stranger. But Hannah, she had believed in her, and that belief had cracked in half. "I'm not saying you're a bad person," Hannah added after a moment. I think maybe you've just forgotten what this job is supposed to be, Lisa whispered. And what is that? Service, Hannah said. Not control, not dominance. Service, respect, compassion. The things that don't show up in the flight manual, but mean everything when the plane hits turbulence, on the ground or in the sky. Lisa blinked hard, fighting the sting behind her eyes. You've spent years making people feel small when you had the power to make them feel seen, Hannah continued. And now you're the one feeling small. Maybe that's the only way you'll remember what it's like to be human again. Lisa didn't speak. She couldn't. She just nodded slowly, once. And for the first time in a long, long time, she listened. If you've ever seen someone fall from the top of their world and realize they were never standing on solid ground to begin with, then you know how much it hurts to watch. But you also know it's in those moments that something new can grow. If you believe Lisa can change, if you think it's not too late for her, leave a comment below. Tell her, because sometimes the worst kind of punishment is finally seeing yourself clearly, and the only way forward is through. As the plane began its slow descent, dipping just slightly to prepare for final approach, Lisa Dawson stood in the galley feeling more exposed than she ever had in her life. The seatbelt signs hadn't lit up yet, but the air had shifted, both literally and metaphorically. The hum of the engines was quieter now, a soft prelude to landing, but inside her chest a storm raged. She gripped the counter for balance, not from turbulence, but because her legs felt like they couldn't hold her anymore. The realization that had been creeping in for hours now settled fully into her bones. This wasn't just about Dr. Maya Patel. This wasn't just one bad call. This was about years of decisions she had made, moments she had dismissed, passengers she had judged, without a second thought. And for the first time, she wondered how many lives she had affected without even realizing it. She heard laughter from the front of the cabin. Someone in first class had made a joke, and another flight attendant chuckled politely. Business as usual, but not for her. Lisa's reality was fractured now. Every bit of confidence she had carried for a decade suddenly seeming like a facade. She caught her reflection in the stainless steel of the galley wall, sharp bun, crisp uniform, expressionless face, and didn't recognize the woman staring back. When had she become so cold, so mechanical? When had she stopped seeing the people around her as people? Just then a child's voice piped up behind her. "Excuse me?" Lisa turned to see a boy, maybe 8 years old, standing just outside the galley. His dark curls bounced slightly as he spoke. "My mom said you might have an extra ginger ale. She gets sick during landings." Lisa blinked, thrown off by the innocence. "Of course," she managed, her voice raspier than usual. She reached for a can and poured it into a cup with trembling hands. As she handed it to him, he smiled. "Thank you," he said brightly. "You're nice." Lisa nearly flinched. She wasn't sure if she had ever heard that from a child before. Most kids avoided her. She had always prided herself on being efficient, not warm. But in that small moment, she felt something shift, something fragile. She nodded once, watching the boy hurry back to his seat, and the interaction left her stunned. It was so simple, so human, and it rattled her more than anything Aiden Patel had said. As the seatbelt sign chimed on, Lisa moved through the cabin for her final check. Her steps were slower than usual, not out of hesitation, but out of fear that each row she passed would remind her of something she didn't want to see. She stopped near row 12, where an elderly man sat alone near the window. His eyes were closed and his breathing was shallow. She remembered him from earlier. He had asked if he could switch to an aisle seat, saying his knees made it difficult to stretch. She had dismissed the request without a second glance. "All seats are final, sir," she told him. Her tone clipped. Now, watching him wince slightly as he shifted, she felt her stomach knot. How many times had she let policy become a wall between her and compassion? She walked on. Near the emergency exit, a young woman, probably a student, fumbled with a crumpled boarding pass and headphones, looking overwhelmed. Lisa had brushed past her during boarding, annoyed that she wasn't seated fast enough. She hadn't asked if it was her first flight, hadn't noticed the anxiety in her hands, but now she saw it. She saw all of it. Every row was a ghost of a moment she had let slip by. The time she snapped at a mother for asking for milk after drink service had ended. The time she rolled her eyes at an older woman who asked how to use the touchscreen. The time she ignored a man in a faded hoodie who wanted to compliment her service, but she was too focused on the first-class passengers. They all blurred together now. An ocean of missed chances, of people she had failed in tiny ways that added up to something enormous. And now the universe had given her Maya Patel a mirror, one that showed her, with perfect clarity, everything she didn't want to see. Lisa reached the front of the cabin and stood still, her hands clasped in front of her like a child waiting to be scolded. Her throat was dry, and her heartbeat was thunderous. The city lights of New York glittered below, drawing closer. In a few minutes, this plane would touch down. The wheels would screech across the runway. The passengers would gather their belongings. And she, Lisa Dawson, would be escorted off the plane like a passenger who had caused a disturbance. Only no one had to raise their voice. No one had to be dragged from their seat. She had done it all to herself. The in-flight phone on the wall buzzed again. She didn't pick it up. She knew what it was. Another reminder, another warning, another sign that her time was up. And yet, as she stood there with the weight of everything crushing her, something inside her stirred. Not defiance, not pride, but remorse. Honest, gut-wrenching, devastating remorse. She wasn't sorry because she got caught. She was sorry because for the first time, she saw the damage. She felt it. She glanced over her shoulder. Maya sat in 3B, her gaze fixed on the window, her expression unreadable. But Lisa knew she wasn't angry. Maya didn't need anger. She had truth on her side. Lisa turned back to the galley and pressed a hand against her chest, her eyes stinging. She didn't want to cry. She didn't think she even could. But the tears came anyway, quietly, like the unraveling of something that had been tightly wound for too long. If you're still here, listening, if you're the kind of person who's ever been overlooked, misjudged, dismissed, you understand the weight Maya carried. But maybe you also understand Lisa in this moment too. Maybe you know what it's like to wake up mid-fall and realize how far you've slipped from who you meant to be. If you believe people can change, even after they've made the worst kind of mistake, leave a comment to let us know. Because sometimes it's not about defending your power. It's about having the courage to admit that you never truly understood it in the first place. The plane had begun its final descent, the city lights of New York glowing faintly beneath scattered clouds. But for Lisa Dawson, it felt less like a return to Earth and more like a free fall from everything she'd built. In the quiet hum of the cabin, passengers gathered their belongings, clicked seatbelts, checked phones, and sipped the last of their drinks. But Lisa stood motionless in the galley, staring blankly at the darkened in-flight phone in front of her. It had rung 5 minutes ago. She had answered, and now the words replayed in her mind like thunder she couldn't escape. You will be escorted off the aircraft upon arrival. Report directly to an executive hearing. You will answer to Mr. Patel himself. Just like that, the last thread holding her career together had snapped. There would be no meeting with HR, no quiet disciplinary write-up. There would be no second chance. Lisa wasn't just under review. She was finished. And the worst part? She knew she had done this to herself. She had thought the initial call from Aiden Patel, the airline's majority shareholder, showing Sayanorm order was the low point. She thought escorting Maya Pandam, his sister, back to her rightful business class seat had been the most humiliating moment of her career. She thought the public apology in front of passengers, the judgment in their eyes, the smirks and whispers as she passed through the aisle, that had been the end. But it wasn't, because this quiet final confirmation was something else. It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, it was final. And that silence screamed louder than any reprimand ever could. Lisa's hands trembled as she reached for the counter, steadying herself. Her legs felt heavy, her body leaden. She had always imagined she'd walk away from this job on her own terms. Maybe retire early, maybe move into training new hires, maybe be recognized for her decade of discipline and experience. But now she'd be leaving through a side door with security at her sides. There would be no send-off, no handshake from management, no framed photo on the break room wall. Just whispers, just shame. She exhaled shakily, wiping her palms on her skirt. She needed to move, needed to do something. The captain's voice echoed through the intercom, announcing descent, thanking passengers, the usual pre-landing script. She barely heard it. Her mind was already in that executive hearing room, already picturing Aiden Patel's eyes across the table. Calm, controlled, unforgiving. And Maya would be somewhere in that building, maybe watching, maybe not. She didn't need revenge. She already had what mattered, the truth, and the power to bring Lisa's world to a stop with nothing but a look and a name. Footsteps approached. Lisa turned, half expecting another order. But it wasn't a crew member. It was her, Maya Patel. Lisa's heart skipped. Maya stood quietly, her bag already slung over her shoulder, her posture easy, composed. The hum of final preparations buzzed around them, but in that moment, time stilled. "I assume you got the call," Maya said simply, her voice neither cruel nor triumphant. Lisa swallowed hard. "Yes." There was a pause. Maya nodded. She didn't gloat, didn't smile, didn't revel in victory. She looked at Lisa like she was a puzzle she hadn't quite figured out. And then, softly, she said, "I don't enjoy seeing people lose their jobs." Lisa's throat tightened. "I don't expect forgiveness," she managed. "Not from you, not from anyone." Maya tilted her head slightly. "No, but I do expect people to learn." Her voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. This This wasn't just about me. It was about everyone you've treated like they were less than. Everyone who sat where they belonged and still felt like they didn't. Lisa blinked back the sting behind her eyes. "I see that now." "I hope you do," Maya replied, "because some people never get the chance to learn before it's too late." She stepped back, adjusting the strap on her shoulder, and then, with a final glance, she added, "Don't waste this." Then she walked away. That was it. No dramatic finale, no explosion, just truth. And the door she had slammed shut on so many others had now closed on her. The irony burned. Lisa turned back to the galley, pressing a hand to her chest. She didn't even recognize the feeling anymore. Was it grief? Was it shame? Was it fear? She had always prided herself on control, composure, discipline. But now she was nothing more than a name on a report, a cautionary tale in a training manual, a lesson about how easy it is to fall when you forget the human being behind the seat number. The plane shuddered softly as the wheels hit the runway. The final descent had ended. But Lisa knew hers was just beginning. In a few minutes, security would walk her off the aircraft. Passengers would watch, so would crew. Some might pity her, most would not, and she wouldn't blame them. Because sometimes the only way you learn is by losing everything you thought made you valuable. But maybe, just maybe, there was a way back. Not to the job. That part was over. But to herself. To the woman she had once been, before the rules had replaced empathy, before protocol had erased compassion. If you're still watching, if you made it to this point in the story, take a second to think about what power really means. It's not the badge on your chest. It's not the clipboard. It's not the uniform. It's how you treat people, especially when you think no one's watching. And if you believe Lisa can change, if you believe that even someone who made a terrible mistake can choose to be better, leave a comment below to let her know. Because sometimes what someone needs more than punishment is encouragement to rise from the fall. And if you believe in stories where justice teaches, but doesn't destroy, don't forget to like this video, to raise a video, and subscribe for more. Let's keep telling stories that remind us what it means to be human. Lisa Dawson sat in the quiet room just outside the executive lounge, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her uniform still looked perfect, but inside, she felt like it was unraveling thread by thread. Moments earlier, she had been escorted off the plane, not in handcuffs, not with shouting, but in a silence that spoke volumes. And now, just behind those polished double doors, Aiden Patel waited. The man who had every reason to end her career with a single sentence. She had spent the entire flight reflecting on everything that had led her here. And by the time she was asked to come in, she had already made peace with what she thought would be her ending. But sometimes life surprises you. Sometimes endings are just detours towards something better. She stepped into the boardroom, her steps quiet but steady. Aiden stood at the far end of the table, arms crossed, unreadable. Two other senior executives sat beside him. The silence hung heavy for a moment before Aiden gestured for her to sit. Lisa did. She didn't plead. She didn't beg. She didn't try to spin the story or protect herself. Instead, she looked Aiden straight in the eye and said something she had never said to a supervisor before. "I was wrong." Aiden raised an eyebrow, surprised. Lisa continued, her voice calm but steady. "Not just about your sister, about who I've become. I stopped seeing people. I started seeing categories, seats, luggage tags, uniforms. I forgot what it means to serve, not as a position of power, but as a place of responsibility. And I know I've probably lost everything because of that. But if there's one thing I can promise you, it's that I have finally learned." There was a long pause. Then Aiden leaned forward. "Do you know what surprised me most?" he asked. "You didn't fight when we made you walk her back. You didn't lash out. You didn't try to deflect the blame. That told me something." Lisa blinked. She hadn't expected that. He continued, "Maya doesn't hold grudges. She's seen too many people make mistakes under prepare, but she does respect those who own their faults." He paused, folding his hands. "And believe it or not, so do I." Lisa stared, not daring to speak. Aiden exhaled. "We're not going to fire you." Her breath caught. "But," he added firmly, "you are being removed from frontline duties. For now, you'll be transferred to our passenger empathy and service recovery program. It's new. We're building it out. You'll work under someone else. Learn, relearn. And if you prove you're serious, maybe there's a future for you here. A different one, but a future nonetheless." It wasn't the punishment she expected. It wasn't even forgiveness. It was something rarer, a second chance. And Lisa knew without a doubt she would never waste it. Weeks passed, then months. Gone were the first-class cabins and business lounges. Lisa now worked in training rooms, on calls with upset passengers, helping resolve issues with kindness and humility. She spoke to people, not to fix problems, but to understand them. And little by little, she began to change, not just how she worked, but who she was. She even returned to flights, not in uniform, but as part of an internal team observing crew behavior, coaching attendants on empathy and discretion. She sat in rows she once ignored. She met passengers she once dismissed. And one day, she even saw Maya Patel again, this time in a terminal cafe. Maya offered her a quiet smile. Lisa smiled back. They didn't need words. The healing had already happened. So what can we learn from Lisa's story? Sometimes we forget that the power we hold, no matter how small, comes with the responsibility to use it wisely. Sometimes we make assumptions. We move too fast. We look at someone and decide who they are before they've said a word. And sometimes it takes losing everything to realize the person we were isn't the person we want to be. But here's the beautiful truth. It's never too late to change. Lisa's story reminds us that humility isn't weakness. It's the beginning of real strength. That owning our mistakes doesn't make us smaller. It gives us the power to grow. And that when we see people as people, we create space not just for respect, but for connection. If you've ever been misjudged, dismissed, or treated like you didn't belong, this story is for you. And if you've ever been the one who made the wrong call, this story is also for you. Because everyone deserves a second chance to be better. So if you believe in growth, in accountability, in redemption, like this video to show your support for Lisa and others like her who are trying to do better. Comment below if you believe people can change. Share a moment when someone surprised you with kindness or when you turned a mistake into a lesson. We want to hear from you. Let's keep this conversation going. And if you love stories where justice and grace meet, where the powerful are humbled and the broken find hope, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next story. Because the sky isn't just a place where we travel, it's where we learn to rise. And today, Lisa Dawson, she's rising.